It is worth saying that the response to this has been pretty divisive. Like, I mean, me and you are absolutely loving Starfield.
Absolutely.
Like, you're about, I think you're 20 hours-ish
Just about 19, yeah.
Right, I'm about 11 in as of 2 a.m. last night. I had to chug as much coffee as possible to, recover this morning. But yeah, we're very much enjoying it. I think it's a return to form. I think it absolutely poops all over Fallout 4. I think it's a return to form, the likes of the Skyrim that we left, the Bethesda that I loved. Actual role-playing from Bethesda. Who'd have thunk it?
Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm interested to talk about that when we go further into this.
Doesn't
podcast.
have a sarcasm option in the dialogue. It's much better than that. But the general reception, we're just going to talk about our own thoughts on it, why we obviously are like loving it. There are some comms with it. There are unavoidable things with it.
It's a Bethesda game.
It's a Bethesda game. There's some bugs. I had some dudes falling through walls. I had the classic, it's almost a vintage bug now, of a character loading without a weapon, but just standing with a ghost gun.
Yeah.
So that was fun. But overall, and the biggest negative I think by far is the state of the surface maps, the UI, how cumbersome everything is, and the weird opening pacing to everything.
Absolutely.
But it hits a gear, it gets phenomenal, it takes time, and there's only so much you can forgive that sometimes, whether or not it feels like a slow burn. I think in this case it does.
Yeah.
And thematically it makes sense with you joining, the group constellation you're exploring. It takes time to get there, but I do think it gets there.
It definitely does. And you know what? I can cut it a bit of slack because, the opening is slow. Yes, it does throw so much at you so quickly. And yes, the UI is absolutely dreadful. Yeah. But the scope of the game is so big, I don't know if they could ever escape that. Like, there's maybe a way to naturally open up this entire universe and get people more familiar with the systems. There's certainly a better way to design the UI. But I just think with the amount and depth that's in this game, it's almost inescapable, right? That it's a little bit of a slow ramp up, or more importantly, I think, a little bit of an awkward ramp up, where you're kind of not sure what the game even is for a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely back that. I think it has a weird, character, it has a weird approach to propulsion when it comes to, why you're doing anything. Right. We're not going to do story spoilers beyond the opening, let's say 20 minutes or whatever. But you're a miner, in terms of working underground, you're not a small child. And you go through the mines, you discover something, you touch an artifact, it's like, oh my God, you see a vision. It's Mass Effect 1.
Yes.
And then you get thrust into a whole world of, what did you see? What's going on? But also in Bethesda / Skyrim fashion or whatever, you can just deviate away and go do a million other things. Obviously that part's going to be your choice if you deviate away. But I think the way they rushed that intro reminded me of Fallout 4, where at the very beginning I was like, oh my God, I kind of hate this. I was just really wanted you to set the scene a lot better. The likes of, I would say Skyrim did it better, or Fallout 3 did it better. But it's one of those things where over the years, I think, but Fallout 3's intro is iconic. It is
iconically bad.
That's a take, but I think that they still, it's iconic for a reason in terms of they set it up. You're going to go chase your father. You only care about him because all the time you spent as a child in the vault. And when you finally become free, it makes sense that you would go everywhere all at once, as well as chasing your dad. Things like that they don't really have here. It's just sort of join Constellation, go explore the stars, whatever you want to do. There's artifacts to be found if you want, but they give you 3 main missions immediately. And the thing I really want to touch on, actually, before I'll wrap back around the story stuff, I want to address some of the criticisms head on.
Yeah, come on.
Because the biggest one by far is their approach to exploration and loading screens and fast travel. The fact that it is not No Man's Sky. It is not seamless. You're not taking off from a planet, going through the clouds into space, going to another planet, dogfighting along the way, or whatever. It's not a seamless thing. It is very obvious that this is the creation engine. It is very obvious that they are. I refer to it as like a Fallout or an Elder Scrolls skin at the start of the game, because you are loading between every little thing. Even on the same planet, you can fast travel around the planets. So I've already seen it being referred to as fast travel the game or loading screen the game.
Right.
Over time, I noticed it less, but it's there.
Absolutely. I think, I do think I kind of benefited from keeping away from the pre-release trailers and some gameplay videos beforehand, because I know a lot of people were expecting that No Man's Sky level of seamless space travel where you're going from the atmosphere into the planet itself and then landing directly. All of that is done through discrete loading screens, like you said.
I don't think they're discrete, but okay.
Well, I mean, discrete in the kind of just the basic description of the word, like they are discrete sort of stances or cells,
Sometimes you get a little cutscene.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You go from the sky, you load in, you land, you take off, you load in again. You know what I mean? That's kind of just what I mean by that. And I was fine with that because, I've just kind of come to expect that from a Bethesda game. That's just kind of how this engine works, like you said. And I don't mind it too much because I'm not even necessarily there for that seamless kind of space travel experience personally. I'm there for the quests. I'm there for the exploration. I'm there for the RPG elements. So I don't know. I can see why people are annoyed. Absolutely. I can see how that could be better. But it doesn't bother me so much necessarily. But I think that is a kind of personal preference thing.
I think it's a weird thing because you have to choose to spend time around the planets. Like you're choosing to go from, there's like the three sort of parts of this game. It's like you're on land, exploring, you're in the cities, you beam up into space, like surrounding each planet. You can spend time in those areas. You can manually travel to a planet, but you can never land. You have to manually pick it off a screen and then land.
Yeah.
And then you have the sort of combat encounters, the interiors and everything for everything else. But like I am then choosing to spend time in those space areas and do dogfights and hail other systems. And one of the and we talk about mission design and emergent stuff because I think that's where it shines. I spent 2 hours because this random NPC hailed me and just described something that might be happening on a system, and I investigated and I lost 2 hours exploring what that was. But it is a weird beat where you sort of take you're on like a dock or whatever, you're about to leave, you're in a shipyard, your ship is right there, and you sort of like hit pause, it can go in the mission list, and then pick what you want to do next, and just beam to the thing without even going there. You never actually discover it, you just arrive there. You can arrive in the space outside it, but then you just pick the next landing spot and land anyway. So it's that sense of discovery is weird.
It is weird, and to be honest, even though I've played, near 20 hours of it, I'm so early days that the kind of random space exploration is still really new to me. I've not really done much of it. I've been to 3 planets total, and I've just kind of mined those for the amount of quests that are there and like the NPCs you can talk to and stuff. But yeah, it is a tricky thing to grasp because like you said, you can arrive at a planet, scan the planet, that will give you a bunch of predetermined landing areas, like there might be a point of interest over here or a point of interest over there. But then you can go rogue and pick your own landing area and just kind of see what you find. And that's quite cool as well. So they do kind of try to balance it out by giving you areas where for certain there's going to be something. It might not be necessarily good, but there's going to be something there.
That bit though, because you can choose to land anywhere, and you can go back to Earth, for example, and like I said, just go around and put a map marker anywhere on the world or the globe or whatever, and just land. There was nothing there, and I know that obviously story-wise, lore-wise, what's happened to Earth, like there shouldn't be anything there, but that's the same with any of the planets, like that aren't. Like there was the whole thing about like I think they said there was 10,000 planets, and there's something like 250 or something like that number that are actually sort of authored and curated and like have things to do, and the rest of it is procedurally generated. So I kind of found that although you can find those spots to drop in where it says like abandoned robot facility or human settlement or whatever it is, the bits in between you're kind of just mining like iron ore or whatever on the way. Like there is nothing there, and that's not necessarily a negative because one of the best things about this game and No Man's Sky is that you need all the negative space to make the positive work. It wouldn't feel huge if everything was just full.
Yes.
You need that distance, otherwise it doesn't feel like there's anything that you're finding in between.
Absolutely agree. Like, I have found enough when I'm on those planets, again, only been to 3, when I've been just randomly exploring. Like, one of my best runs on the game so far was when I landed on the moon outside of the first planet that you arrive at, and it just had like a bunch of stuff. There was like a robotics facility over there with a bunch of pirates in. There was a bounty hunter ship that kind of landed and like came after me, and it was just like 4 or 5 like just really nicely concentrated areas that I could explore. But yeah, I would fully agree with you. Like in between those areas, there is just like a lot of open space. And I think, again, this might be a personal preference thing. I like that in my space games because, like you said, I want to feel that kind of sense of isolation to a certain degree before then I stumble upon something. And it kind of makes you appreciate different planets. Like, how inhabited are they? Are there any alien species on this planet? Is this one dead? Like, what kind of life are we finding? It's why I really enjoyed, even though they do get criticized, the planets in the original Mass Effect. Like those are defined by a lot of empty space. There's not always much to see. But when I'm playing a space game, man, there's something about the image of my astronaut in this massively vacant space with the whole of the cosmos behind them, and they're just kind of like walking along a crater or something. That might get like annoying over 150 hours, but in this early moment, there's a lot of wonder to that.
Yes, well, that's why No Man's Sky was phenomenal. No Man's Sky still poops on this in regards to, I'm using safe YouTube words here, but poops on it in regards to that feeling. No Man's Sky is that feeling encapsulated, and it always was even at launch because they had the scale of it, and you didn't know what you were going to find. And obviously it was subjective as to what you did find, whether being worth it or not. Obviously there was a reliance on mining components and everything else, and they put more narrative stuff in there over time. I always loved that feeling, though, that isolation of not knowing what's on the next planet. That was always such a pure explorative narrative thematic that just totally worked, and they're doing here. It's weird to bring in some of the stuff with character backstory stuff because they are so hands-off and because they let you go in so many different directions, you can have conversations with characters that refer to past events in the world that you wouldn't know or you don't know yet. Or I had that kind of work where I was meeting up with certain factions. Excuse me, and then my character was saying, like, oh, weren't you guys warring? Didn't you just come out of a war?
Yeah.
And I was like, but in the other conversation, I'm being told about the universe and I don't know anything, and I'm just this like humble miner who was like doing a basic job, and now I'm thrust out into the world.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff can kind of happen out of order in regards to like what I would say is a better onboarding process. Like the first mission you can do, it's optional for the United Systems, the UC, whatever you call those guys, United Colonies. That walks you through a museum that tells you the history of the lore, the world itself. Essential stuff, like absolutely essential. Made me love the setup of the world, but you wouldn't have that unless you manually sort it out.
Well, the thing is, like, that is absolutely true. Like, a lot of that stuff is optional, but by completely combing those early areas, I kind of found like a bunch of NPCs that would give me that information in a different way. Like, you can go to the museum and just get it all in one big dump. But I had another sub-quest, a side quest, that took me to another planet to talk to someone where I found out a portion of that same history through their perspective. So there are different ways that they roll that out, which I kind of thought
really
was like
good.
really interesting. Like, again, we're not going to spoil what's going on with Earth, but you went to Earth before you got the backstory of it. I went to Earth after I had the backstory. So I think doing both, it kind of... I don't know, I think it does a good job of igniting your mystery senses and getting you thinking about, wait, what is this faction?
Yeah.
How do they relate to this one? You kind of get a drip fed a little bit, or you get like the big exposition dump if you want it. I don't know. They've balanced that nicely for me, honestly.
I was trying, because it's interesting thinking about where Bethesda are, because in Fallout 4, they expedited all this stuff. Like that opening bit, for as much as they talked about at the time, like, oh, we're going to get to see what it's like before the bombs dropped. It was over in like 10 minutes. Like, it flew by. And then you were back out the vault. You were on your way. You're doing a Bethesda. You're doing, like, you know, you're just in there. And that felt quite rushed at the time. And it's one of those things where, like, they have that sort of relationship with their audience. And we've seen enough Bethesda games now that I wonder how much they think they need to get that initial stuff out the way and then just set you off in a million different directions and try and walk that line between giving you something propulsive to do, like, you know, looking into the ancient artifacts or exploring what's happened to certain characters or whatever, but also saying this doesn't need to be done right now because we're actually going to make an entire faction that is about exploration. So it's okay in world, in kayfabe, for you to go do all these other things. Yes, I've been watching AW. So it's one of those things. So I think that's an interesting line. I don't know what you think of that. I think they've almost intentionally cut short the opening. I don't think they nail it though. I think the opening does feel it's the worst part of the game.
Hard agree. The opening is the worst part of the game. It's incredibly rushed, like you said. But honestly, I mentioned it earlier on. Like, Bethesda have never nailed an opening for me. The opening of Skyrim is iconic, where you're kind of, you know, going to get tried, I suppose, executed. Like, that scene is great, but I don't love the mission that comes after. Yeah, that's what I mean. That scene when the dragon arrives.
Just a bit when he's on the wagon.
Oh, no. The wagon, the first cutscene, the first like conversation you have, great. The mission that comes after, less great. We started getting a bit bogged down for me. Same with Oblivion. Like, the narrative around that's cool. The trip through the sewer, really bad. Fallout 3, I like the way that builds the world, but it's a slog to get through, especially on a replay where you have like an hour where you're just being this kid. And that got a lot of criticism at the time. And I think they've started to address that here, where they're like, we don't want another Fallout 3. We don't want people saying they're bored because the onboarding is too long. We want to get to that open world exploration as quick as possible. And they kind of haven't done that in a good way, I don't think necessarily.
No.
But it is a shame because it's so much of the early game is about figuring this stuff out for yourself. And yeah, obviously you have so many places, so many avenues you can explore that kind of give you hints and point you in certain directions. But the first city that you go to, New Atlantis, is absolutely great. Maybe the best city that Bethesda has ever made, certainly the most complex and most detailed. But because of that, it's overwhelming, and you suddenly have about 20 missions, and you're kind of thinking, I have no idea what to do now. I'm kind of paralyzed by choice in a way.
Which is why we should wrap back around to like some of the, which is another kind of criticism that comes alongside that, is the UI stuff and just trying to find your footing. And it's weird because, and I don't want to cut them all the slack. I don't think every single bit of this is like, it works in their favor over time, but you feel lost and then you feel found over time. And it's one of those things where like the UI is like just this weird radial menu, pause menu, where things feel buried like 2 or 3 layers too deep, especially with trading. Everything's just like on this weird, if you're trading or selling something or swapping items with a companion, it's all done with like LB, but it has has one item in the middle of the screen, and unless you notice on the bottom right what you're actually looking at, or in the very, very top left, it's just a bit hard to parse that stuff out. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with just thinking like, okay, my character's over encumbered because it's a Bethesda game. Where is a merchant? How do I sell this stuff off? And you bring up the surface map or wherever you are, and the assumption is a city would have a merchant. And the surface map, which again is one of the biggest criticisms of the game, barely exists. It's like a basic topographical map of an area, but done through like a dot matrix. So you've sort of got like hills and valleys, but no real discernible where you are and where you're going. It just has like a bunch of badges that represent the districts, and you're just kind of there as well. So it's like, okay, what the hell do I do? And I just couldn't. I was like, well, where's the merchant? I had messaged you, and you were like, okay, there's one down in the slums somewhere. Like, there's slums to this city? Like, what the hell? I do think that if you're just trying to find a story marker, I love that you can just like put a pin on that in the menu, in the mission menu, and then when you hit LB and bring your scanner up, it puts the path on the floor. And you can just follow it like Dead Space. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's a way better way for you to do a Bethesda and keep me out of menus and keep me immersed. But I wish they just had a way of letting you know where to sell stuff or know which planets you've been to. Because if you want to revisit something, you can't. Like, unless you remember where you were, there's no log of like where you've been or whatever. It's just, and because it's randomly generated, it might not even appear again anyway.
Interesting. I never thought about that element. Like, I guess because I've only gone to a few planets, I've become very familiar with them. Like that first city, I fully agree. Like, the UI makes the opening hours of this game far more difficult than they maybe should be. Every UI, every menu is frustrating to navigate. Like, the crafting system is frustrating. The shipbuilding is frustrating. Just finding a mission is frustrating. It's really finicky. It's really weird.
It feels so thrown together as well in terms of like stuff they've tried before. Like, I remember discovering the crafting table, the spell table or whatever in Skyrim. Yeah. And it's just kind of off to the side when you're in the first major part of like Winterhold. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we took that animation, that idea of walking up to a table and doing stuff, and we put a bunch of them in the lodge in Starfield. And it's just kind of there if you want it, but you don't need it, but it's cumbersome.
That's it. It is cumbersome. I think that's a good way to describe it, which is, you know, maybe ironic considering how encumbered you always are in this game. But going back to what you said about, like, you know, finding merchants, finding your way about that city, and when I said about it being overwhelming, it absolutely was. But one of my biggest joys in the early hours of the game was fully exploring that city because it was so big. And when it just kept on going, when I was finding new nooks and new levels to it, over and over again, I was just like blown away by the scale of it, and it allowed me to get familiar with the layout as well in a way where I wasn't just following markers, which was a criticism I had about previous Bethesda games, where I was barely even looking at my surroundings. I was just clicking the button, that's a merchant, I'm going to beeline there, I'm not even going to really look around. This time I was kind of forced to look around. I was getting, you know, used to the residential areas. I now know, probably off by heart, how to get to like the gun shop, or how to get to like the medical facilities, or like certain restaurants or whatever it is. And just exploring that city, which is called New Atlantis, and finding, you know, new missions, new NPCs to talk to. I was just blown away by the depth of it, because going into this game, my biggest worry was that you got 250 planets that you can land on. You got thousands of planets you can, you know, explore and scan. I was thinking, how are they going to retain what I love about Bethesda, which is that detail, which is the level of quests, the level of free-form exploration that you have, and stuff that is constantly being, you know, delivered to you in what feels like a player-driven way. How are they going to maintain that with such a breadth of content? So I was shocked, surprised, and completely in awe by the fact that this was the most detailed city they've ever done. Right. And I was just getting quest after quest after quest, walking into this room, talking to this person, going into this building, finding out what's going on there. I want to learn about this religion. I want to do that. It just kept going and going to the point where I spent about 7 hours in that city alone. Right. And I didn't even want to explore. I've got a whole universe at my disposal, right? But I want to scour every inch of this. I want to talk to everyone. I want to see what's in the slums. I want to go down there. I want to figure out what this waterfall is. You know what I mean? Just had all of these points of interest. And I kind of thought at that point, even if they fall to bits towards the end, I just thought, you've managed this. You know what I mean? You've nailed the scope with a level of depth that I wanted. Even if the other planets are a little bit sparse outside the cities, I don't mind, because the amount of content that's here, amazing.